The summer we rented a chalk white cottage at the edge of the bay, and the lighthouse blinked like a patient eye over the harbour. Mornings began with the scent of salt and lemon soap, the boards of the kitchen floor still damp from the night, and the sea pressing softly at the windows, as if it too remembered something we had forgotten. The air held a heat that wasn't urgent, but insistent, a quiet insistence that summer was not a thing to seize, but a thing to settle into. Father would stride down the lane to mend nets, his footsteps clacking on the stones, while Mother husked corn and brewed tea that smelled faintly of pine needles and the sweetness of dried fruit. My sister tucked her long hair behind her ears and practiced chords on a guitar that sounded like it hadn't quite found its voice yet, and I, the younger one, learned to listen before I spoke, which is not easy when every day was a new question begging to be asked. On the first day of real heat, we climbed over sun-warmed dunes to reach the stretch of beach where the water lay in a slate of glass, unbroken, except for the slow blink of a boat's lantern far out at sea. The old harbour tucked itself between two stone jetties, and the air carried the hum of conversations you could only catch if you leaned in close enough to the wind. The fisherman's weathered jokes, the gossip of boats, the steady drift of gulls circling like punctuation marks above a paragraph of waves. The village children played tag along the water's edge, their laughter rising and falling with the tide, and I learned quickly that there are small rituals that thread people together here, ways of moving, of looking, of waiting for someone to step into a moment with you, rather than rushing past it alone. It was during one of these days, when the sun stood high and the world felt stitched together with thin, golden threads, that I first met Mira. She was the fisher's daughter, a few years older than me, with hair the colour of sea-washed rope, and eyes that seemed to have learned to listen to the sea before they learned to blink. We found each other at the end of the jetty, where the wood smelled of tar, and the water beneath shimmered like a handful of silver coins spilled from the sky. Mira didn't hurry to speak. She watched the boats instead, as if the harbour itself carried a language she could translate if she stood still long enough. "Do you hear it?" she asked me then, nodding toward a gull that cried and then fell silent as a breeze shifted, and the line of boats tilted in their moorings as if listening too. "Hear what?" I asked, though I knew she meant the sea's quiet grammar, the way every sound seemed to carry a meaning if you listened hard enough. "The pause between the waves," she said. "That's where the truth sits. Between the breaths, there's a breath you can take if you're brave enough to wait." We stood there, ankles in the water, the sun bright on the moving surface, the world reduced to a small, patient moment. Mira pulled a strand of seaweed from her hair and tucked it behind my ear, as if she were tucking away a worry I hadn't known I carried. Then she did something that surprised me. She spoke softly to the sea as if it might answer back. "If you want to know where to go," she said, "you have to listen for where the water tells you to stand, not where your feet want to tread." Her voice was like the tide turning a page, patient and inexhaustible. We watched a small, battered skiff drift toward the jetty, the boat's bottom scraped clean of barnacles by years of patient neglect. A man sat at its stern, mending a torn sail with needle and thread, all the while speaking softly to the boat, as if it were a stubborn child who needed gentle admonition rather than loud instruction. It struck me then that the harbour did not insist on grand stories or heroic feats. It welcomed patient rooms, small, quiet places where a person could learn to be still and hear. Mira's presence, the boat's old breath, the tides. Even rhetoric, These things began to shape a certain kind of listening in me. That afternoon, Mira took me along the pier to a narrow gap where the water ran clear and shallow. We found a smooth, flat stone that seemed to hold the light in its grey skin, and she told me it was a memory stone, something you keep to remind yourself of a time when you were brave without knowing it. We pressed the stone to our palms, and for a moment the world narrowed to the coldness of that pebble and the heat of the sun on our backs. Then Mira bent her head toward mine and spoke in a whisper I would hear again many times in the years that followed. If you stay long enough and listen to your own silence, you can hear where your life wants to go. I didn't understand it then, not entirely, but the seed had been planted. A belief that meaning did not always arrive with a thunderclap, that often it came as a patient answer to a stubborn question. A word softened by time, a gesture of help when you least deserved it and most needed it. In the days that followed, I found myself lingering at the edge of conversations rather than leaping into them. I learned to watch the way a mother's shoulder sank when a story grew heavy, to notice how a father's eyes softened when a child spoke the truth aloud and a tremor of fear stayed hidden behind his smile. I began to see that every ordinary act, bread cooling on a rack, a kettle's sigh, the careful placing of a chair before the stove, held the weight of a decision made with care, and those small decisions, in aggregate, formed the longer arc of a life. Time moved in the gentle rhythm of the coast that summer, the rare rain that smelled of damp earth and something older than rain, the evenings when a painter's boat glowed faintly under the lamplight and the harbour's water kept its secrets. I learned to tell the days by the colour of the sky at dusk, that pale blue that promised nothing and delivered everything. I learned that family rituals, exceptional in their nondescript consistency, do not shout their significance, but they carve their shape into a person's memory with quiet hands. The ritual of tea and bread in the mornings, the way father tucked a stray straw of hay back into the shed, mother's steady hands as she braided her hair while telling us to be kind to strangers who might become friends. These too became a map for my later life, a map that did not draw borders but opened doors. As the weeks pressed on, the memory of Mira stayed with me not as a spectacular moment but as a steady influence, like the tide's insistence that a shore not be conquered but accompanied. When the summer ended and the cottage's shingles cooled and the harbour's colour shifted to olive and pewter, I found I had learned something durable, that listening to the world can teach you more about your own heart than any loud claim of having found something true. The sea had given me a way to be present, to be patient, to be unafraid, to stand still and hear what was being said in the quiet between breaths. Back home later, when I walked through streets that no longer smelled of salt, the memory of that coast remained a lighthouse in my chest, not a beacon to guide me away, but a steady light to remind me to pause, to consider, to choose kindness over quickness, to ask questions before I assume I know the answer. The years did not erase the ache of growing older, but they did soften it, as a shoreline softens when the rain comes with time. I learned that what we call memory is not a treasure to hoard, but a garden to tend. You prune the regrets, water the gratitude, and let the wildflowers of small good acts spring up where you least expect them. Now, in the quiet of a room filled with the soft ticking of a clock and the distant murmur of neighbours going about their evenings, I still hear the sea's old language, the way a gull's cry folds into the wind, the way the harbour sighs when a new day begins. I am not exempt from loss. I have carried people I loved into the ground, and carried parts